There's a couple of other peptides mentioned here that were asked about. BPC157 is one that I've heard about a lot. If it's the one I'm thinking of, there's also TB500 mentioned here.
Yep.
Are they used together often?
Very often, yep. So
injury related?
Yeah, most often you'll see these products used as injury, as a healing stack. People call it the Wolverine stack. There are some other benefits to it, some profound anti-inflammatory impacts. You could possibly use them in areas if you've got a client with severely elevated inflammatory markers from some kind of insult, whether it be a heavy androgen cycle or something that's caused a large amount of inflammation in the body, so which you can use for just controlling systemic inflammation. But most people that are going to use them will be using them in some form of injury rehab or injury recovery protocol. They are quite effective. There's a reason that they've become very well known amongst the fitness industry. They've been around for quite some time now.
When you say systemic inflammation, would you say that then there would be, it's somewhat difficult because when it comes to sport at a high level, obviously there's a lot more, well, generally depending on what kind of sport you're competing in, there's testing and things like that involved. But is this where people would start to consider using these things? If, let's say, if I was like really, really into advanced long distance running, would I not be creating a ton of inflammation that I could somehow manage using something like this? Is that still where it would be useful?
Possibly. Both compounds, as far as I'm aware, are not on the WADA, or they're not allowed to be used if you're drug tested. So most running sports, obviously, or at least at any elite level, are going to fall under a drug-tested banner. So that would be something you would either have to be very careful using or just not use at all.
My regard was more in that was more so me, I guess, making that a point. But like, let's say someone didn't care for that, but they still engaged in. Obviously, we know that like a lot of that, like hybrid training and stuff like that's super popular now. So some people want to run like 50Ks, doing a lot of heavy weightlifting. Would someone like that benefit from it, using it, maybe not year round, but quite often?
I wouldn't go quite often, but possibly if they were using it as a pure anti-inflammatory agent, maybe after something with a large insult, maybe you just run a full marathon. Maybe post that marathon would be a good time to use it to bring down systemic inflammation. But it's probably not something I would be using on a regular basis, unless possibly you were doing a short cycle of it up into a competition where you were doing repeat heavy bouts of training. But even then, it's probably wouldn't be my first port of call for use.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions here, which is an interesting one to answer, because I doubt you're going to get up and pin somewhere in your body in front of us so that we understand.
Maybe next week, Jacob.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't realise that was an option. I definitely would have got you to bring some stuff. But the question here was, obviously we've outlined some of the benefits, but the reason I wanted to do that is so that someone that's listening might not be aware of those. Someone has basically talked about the benefits of BBC TB500, as we talked about, mainly around that inflammation area and just injuries in general, which is where I've heard people using it. And then they had mentioned the MK677. They were interested about like the best tips for actually like using them or injecting them, which I know some people are reluctant for, because it's not to give someone a cycle and tell them what to do, but I think they're kind of looking for like what do you find maybe would be the most useful way to go about using them, when you would inject them, or how you would go about it to do it safely?
All right, look, these aren't particularly dangerous compounds per se. Just to give safety information, I would say the only real major drawback on these compounds is going to be in relation of potentially increasing cancer growth. So provided you're cancer-free, it's still always worth doing your due diligence, but it's probably not a hugely health risk type compound that it's not something that's putting a large health risk on you. Typically, I would recommend a combination of BPC and TB500 administered locally to the injury. Obviously, some injuries are going to be in areas where you just cannot administer it locally. If it's a very deep muscle or something, I would just get it as close as you can. Obviously, there's certain areas, like if you're right in the elbow or something, I also would not suggest go putting a needle in some high nerve and bone containing area unless you really know what you're doing.
What could be some of the issues of like that would arise if someone did that? It was in the wrong spot.
You could cause some issues with your nerves, quite easily aggravate a nerve if you inject straight into a nerve. I don't know if people have ever been dry needled and kind of get the feeling up for the day or two afterwards of how sore that can be. So you can aggravate areas there. You can even cause damage to the nerves, which can be a bit of a longer term issue. And obviously, if you're going to areas like elbows or knees, kind of those intra-articular areas, is a higher risk for infection as well. There's just more things that can go wrong through the administration. The actual injecting of the drug is probably the most dangerous aspect of it. Now that I think of it, you've got a risk of infection and stuff like that. The thing is, with all of these injectable compounds, they are still going to go systemic. So whilst administering them locally is probably going to give you the best results, if it is in an area that you can't administer to locally, you will still get results. Just administering subcutaneous in the bottom of your belly fat or something like that, because the drug will be absorbed and go local go systemic in your whole body, and then kind of be redistributed by blood flow and whatnot to the areas that require the healing. It's not just you inject your elbow and only your elbow is going to receive the TB500 and BPC. You may get a little bit more local kind of binding of the drugs in that area, but they are still going to go systemic and kind of have impacts on the entire body.
If someone could, anyone who's had their blood taken, for example, could, like, let's say you were planning on doing this and like you really didn't have an ability to find out any more about it, but you'd had your blood taken, you'd seen how they went about that, or obviously how they find a vein and things like that, you could inject it like people would something regularly, like you said, even if it was your leg that was sore, if you weren't comfortable, for example, injecting something into your leg because for whatever reason it was harder. Like you could, as you said, you could go with something as simple as just putting it in your arm or a point in your leg if you didn't feel comfortable, like you said, in an area where it was a bit more specific, where there was maybe more issues.
Yeah, honestly, if it's an area that you're uncomfortable with, just subcutaneously in your belly fat's probably the easiest way to administer it. It's a very simple, small subcutaneous injection. Your needles are about 1/2 inch long. It's not even going to be felt by most people. It's probably the most achievable route of administration for most people, especially if it's kind of their first time injecting something. It's really quite a low risk administration when just going subcutaneous into the belly fat.
Interesting.